Good afternoon, DET for 2. I'm Captain Mejia, and today I'm joined with,
Captain Hedderly.
and we're just going to be jumping into the podcast straight up. So it's been a while since I've seen you guys here. Currently, Captain Hernandez is behind the screen helping us out. So we're just kind of jump into your AFSC, your background with the Air Force, and just general advice you might be able to give the cadets. So that being said, would you like to introduce yourself to everybody?
Sure. So Captain Hedderly, like I said, I go by Rust actually. So that's the whole call sign thing. But AFSC is developmental engineering for the Air Force now, right? Because Space Force has split off, which is 62 Echo. We have a handful of shreds. And what was the last part of that?
Where you're from?
I'm from Las Vegas, Nevada. So I went to school at UNLV, but I am from Las Vegas. Moved away there once I joined the Air Force.
Okay. You miss the sunny?
I do, but that's why I love San Antonio. We just got here 3 months ago, right?
Basically the same thing.
It's all very similar, yeah. Okay. Mild winters.
Yeah, it doesn't get too cold, but when it does, it hits. So we want to know, why did you decide to pursue your career in the Air Force? What made you, inspired you to jump through that and then eventually, pursue a career as an officer?
So my uncle is a retired fighter pilot. He's very old, right? So flew in Vietnam. All my uncles and my grandfather were in aviation, and so I always had an interest in the Air Force. I knew when I got into engineering that I was really into kind of the DOD. If we see Iron Man back in 2008, right? Designing weapons sounded really cool, and just being connected to a larger mission. I was interning at the time when I made the decision to join the technical degree sponsorship program. I came in. I was interning at the power company. And it was like $25 an hour for an internship, which was awesome, right? And I had my professional engineer who was making great money. But you lived in a cubicle farm, which is something you can do in the Air Force, but not as common. And I just saw people who worked there for 20, 30 years, and I was like, this is not what I want to do every day. So decided to pursue something with a little higher purpose, something that would get me out of Las Vegas, and something that my family and I could just really enjoy the adventure on.
Okay. You mentioned you went through this different kind of route into the Air Force pursuing your officership, which is different from us as ROTC cadets. Can you elaborate a little more on what that process was for you?
Absolutely. So when I went back to school, I actually approached my ROTC DET and said, hey, what are the odds I could come join you here? Right? I'd like to join the Air Force. I'd been out of school for a couple years working full time. And he said, well, you're kind of old. You got some tattoos. Probably not going to be that competitive for our ROTC DET. At the time, we were in decreasing accessions.
Uh-huh.
So it was very difficult to get into any of the services. And I was ultimately like, okay, but he's like, go talk to a recruiter across the way. So the recruiter goes, well, what kind of engineer are you? I was like, right now I'm a mechanical engineer. And I finished most of my 200 classes right through thermodynamics and all that jazz. And he goes, I don't really need mechanical engineers, but I got this cool program if you'll change to electrical computer. And I said, okay. So pursued that, and for the next couple of years, graduated within 2.5 years. I finished my degree up. But the program was basically you went fully active duty. So, you were an A1C, and you were owned by the recruiting squadron that you went through. So it's very unique. Didn't have any ROTC requirements. Didn't have to do anything other than if I wasn't in school, I had to work at the recruiting office. So I kind of semi-worked in recruiting for like a year and a half, if you will. And then once you complete it, you get slotted for OTS. And you go within a few months.
So what was that like, kind of switching between school and then working your recruiting right there in the office?
For me, managing it, having a family, I was used to working full-time and going to school, like I'm sure many cadets are. So it really wasn't that big of a deal, right? And those were the times when I was out of school. So as opposed to what I'd been doing previously, which was like go to school all day, then go to work, or for the cadets here, right, go to school, go to the ROTC classes, then go to work. It was pretty seamless transition to say the winter break, spring break, summer break, just show up at the office every day and kind of pretend to be a recruiter. They told me you're not wearing stripes, so you didn't go to basic training. It's very interesting. You went up to MEPS, and you would get your medical package like you were going to basic training, and then they'd hand it to you and say, go home. And so he's like, you're not wearing a uniform. He gave me some fancy polo, and he's like, all right, go work in the office and be professional. And it was actually a really insightful and valuable job as I commissioned.
Okay, what would you say the experiences you gained off of that kind of were?
So I worked underneath a Security Forces Master Sergeant, and so just a lot of that senior NCO mentorship, right? Kind of explaining, here's what things say, but this is how things are, and then seeing how difficult it is to get into the Air Force. Period. Right? Whether it's through enlistment or commissioning, seeing the type of people that were coming in, getting to talk to people why they wanted to join. It was a really great experience.
Nice. And how would you say that transition was for you? Jumping back a little bit, going from a mechanical engineer to an electrical for, your selection as an officer.
That was a little brutal. I mean, having to retake some
Yeah.
classes that, with freshmen, first off. I also had to pile on credits. I mean, I had a lot of 18, 20, and 21 credit hour semesters, right, taking full-time engineering classes to get done. So I was studying a lot, right, because I was also trying to raise my GPA. So I would say that it's not anything I regret. I actually really have a passion for electrical engineering now, and I was fortunate it slotted me into a really great unit in electronic warfare as I commissioned.
Nice. Okay. So you would say that you still kind of hold that passion, as you mentioned, for electronics and electrical engineering as you kind of work with the Air Force?
I think I just have a general passion for engineering. Being able to solve problems and work on stuff is something that I enjoy doing. And surprisingly enough, you'll find there's a lot of STEM people in both the Air and Space Force, and a lot of people even that don't have technical backgrounds but enjoy that same type of problem solving throughout the Air Force and the Space Force. Okay. I would say that if you look at the general officer corps across the board, one of the things you do well is solve problems. So maybe it's not a long, difficult math problem or science problem, but it might be complex in the fact that you're going to have to navigate a lot of variables and figure things out.
So in that sense, kind of the problem-solving mindset that you're getting with engineering goes hand in hand with the work that you do on the Air Force, regardless.
I would say that's accurate. But I would say that all the degrees and the training you get here at ROTC or OTS or the Academy all follow that same trend.
Okay, that's cool. Would you say that is that encouraging you to pursue some sort of higher education? Are you looking at that, or have you already received that kind of training?
I have. So I got to my first duty station at Eglin Air Force Base, and within about 4 months, I applied to the Air Force Institute of Technology. So I got my letter of academic eligibility for a number of degrees, and I decided I didn't want a PCS up to right pat to pursue that. So they did offer one ABET accredited, so for the engineers out there, ABET accredited program that was distance learning, and that was systems engineering. So I started working that on top of my full-time job with wife and kids, and in 2018 I graduated with that degree.
Okay, does system engineering, is that like more manufacturing side, or is that, well, what does that mean when you say systems engineering?
They had a couple tracks. They had a space track and they had a human systems track. So I took the human systems track, which was focused on a lot of the stuff you'd see when we talk about designing aircraft or designing other interfaces, right? Making sure that the human in the loop has the best layout, right, for them to interface with. The easiest access to controls, right? How do I make things look? How do I make menus navigatable at speed, right? So I did my thesis on B-2 bomber and its electronic warfare system. And used my job that I was working in to kind of discuss how their sensor systems can detect threats and what type of feedback the pilots get, and how they can navigate different things to be effective in combat.
Okay. So after you went through that higher education through the Air Force and were able to apply that towards your squadrons, how would you say the Air Force kind of views engineering and views your different, I guess, backgrounds and information on that and how they use it towards the Air Force and your goals?
So the Air Force is really big now that I'm learning here at AFPC on leveraging what you've done. So while still trying to get you new experiences, right? But finding ways to take that experience that you have and put you in positions where you can utilize it and grow. And so I'd say that they do that across the board for all career fields. And so they look at that experience and they go, okay, and I say they, right, the larger Air Force community, right, the powers that be, and say, it'd be a really great next job for this person here. Or you might get contacted by somebody and say, hey, I'd really like you to come work here. You have a really interesting background or the type of background we're looking for. And so that's the type of thing that, I wouldn't say the education itself does that, but combine the education with your experience and you have opportunities.
That's cool. Would you say that most of your engineering opportunities have been hands-on or more like managerial when it comes to the work you've done?
Definitely both. My first assignment, I actually got to program electronic warfare systems.
Cool.
So, doing full analysis on the spectrum, interfacing with Intel systems, and then actually having labs with basically what you'd call string jets. I'll call them string jets. LRUs, line replaceable units. Maintenance officers might get mad at me if that's wrong. But basically they take all the guts out of the jet that we needed to use, and they would set them up in a lab, right? Connect them all, and so it's basically like we have the cockpit, we have all these sensors, and then we used a CSIM, combat electromagnetic emitter system, to basically simulate the environment. And so we would use that to reprogram all the different platforms.
Okay. Would you say it's pretty, often you're able to do more of those hands-on projects, or is that more of a rarity you see within the Air Force?
I would say as a brand new lieutenant, you will have more of those opportunities. As you grow up, the Air Force for officers is trying to shape leaders, and you will be put in more managerial or supervisory roles. But there's always an opportunity to get your hands on something if that's what you want to do.
Okay. So then, I guess like the message to these cadets trying to be engineers is that they'll dip their toes into that experience, but try and grow further beyond it to learn more of like the overall applications, you would say, and how they affect the wider Air Force.
And learn the policy and guidelines we work within, right?
Okay.
So having that technical expertise and that hands-on experience combined with the knowledge, you can be really effective at creating change, which I know a lot of people want to do, right? They want to go out there and change things. So, but you have to have both sides. So, it's not intended for you to be a worker bee for your career. That's not the long-term plan. Just like it's not the plan for, a pilot to just fly planes their entire career.
Okay, so then kind of jumping off of that, after you're moving from just doing these hands-on things, what opportunities are there for you to advance as an engineer now jumping into the wider Air Force?
So after I did that, I went up to a green door assignment. If you're familiar with green door assignments, they're highly classified assignments. I went and did that up at Hanscom and was able to leverage some of my knowledge in the past. Got to learn a little bit more about how the acquisitions world works, right? How do we buy fancy things, fancy planes? And then I went to education with industry at Lockheed Martin, which was fantastic, up in Fort Worth. That's where I was before here. I did 10 months working on the F-22 and F-35 program up at the plant with a couple other officers. I had a logistics and a maintenance officer with me. And then I came down here. So I'd say that the Air Force has had a plan, but also you kind of create your own road. So I wouldn't say it's some big overarching, like they're moving all the chess pieces around. It is a much more fluid work environment, if that makes sense. So, going forward, there's no opportunity in at least my career field or some other career fields that I'm excluded from. Does that make sense? My hands-on experience is simply something I'm able to leverage as I move forward.
Okay. So how would you describe that experience was with Lockheed Martin, being able to work with them? Is there stuff you can talk about that, or is that more like under wraps?
No, I can talk about some of it. I did have an NDA signed, right? So some of the things that are specific to Lockheed I can't discuss, right? Because I was kind of what we'll call an agent within their organization, right? They didn't pay me, right? The program's called Education with Industry. It's open to a lot of career fields. And so I go become an employee with them for 10 months. I don't wear a uniform, and I'm embedded on a number of their teams. I got to tour around a ton of their facilities. They treated us amazingly. It was fantastic. But I would say learning how the government affects private business, how they need that experience within their organization in order to be effective in building weapon systems. And then just how many, 60% of their base up there is prior military in some form or fashion. So working with those folks and getting a sense of really the contractors that I interface with on a day-to-day basis when I'm back in the Air Force, depending on the job I'm in, was extremely useful.
Okay, and would you, later on in your career have to work more with civilians on that side, contracting between them to, focus on sort of engineering projects you guys are working with later?
Yeah, so I did that both at my first assignment, second assignment, any of these large contractors or any contractor in general that is working on any DoD system is going to be tied in with the military, right? It's not like they just hand things off most of the time and then they're gone. So it is constant updates, constant improvements, pending contractual things. And so that, it'll continue. I had already done it and it'll continue as I move forward. And that will be for really, I'd say, any Air Force member is probably going to have some sort of connection to that DoD enterprise throughout their career.
Okay. So taking it back a little bit with your role in the electronic warfare squadron, how did you guys operate and what was your specific role, working with that squadron?
So I started out reprogramming the F-16 and C-130J. I was just a reprogramming engineer, right? Had a team of contractors, military and civilian there. About a year and a half in, I moved up to be in the B2 and advanced program shop. A little while later, I became the B2 branch chief. So during Operation Odyssey Lightning, I got a chance to really execute some real-time ops. It was a very unique opportunity, but mixed with technical leadership. I mean, there's a lot of things that were open to me. It was a unique squadron. Now that I have grown up a little bit and I'm working at AFPC, not everybody gets something like that as their first assignment, but we did have, I mean, just in our group, we had about 55 lieutenants. So,
wow.
I mean, it was not a small organization by any means. It's now ascended to be its own wing, so it's no longer. They might still be the 36th Electronic Warfare Squadron, but it's now the 350th Spectrum Warfare Wing. If you're looking it up online.
So how was it working with a bunch of your peers then? If you're surrounded by all these lieutenants,
It was fantastic. I mean, I made a ton of friends, people that I still talk to regularly today. One of the biggest things you can do in those first assignments, especially if you have a large military cadre that are in your peer group, is make connections. Because you'll never know where someone's working or what they're doing or who they know that you can leverage to get answers to problems you're having or find your next assignment, find your next job. Learn about what they're doing outside of your little sphere. And so I would say leverage not just your unit if you have a lot of peers, but whatever installation you get to, meet the other CGOs, see what they're doing, talk to them, learn about other career fields because it will be very useful as you try and solve problems.
Okay, and this kind of leads to the question that we always ask, the officers we bring in here. How was that transition jumping into being a lieutenant and working at your first assignment?
So it was awesome. I mean, I was very lucky, right? Being a young lieutenant engineer, and all my bosses were either more senior engineers, right? Or we had a lot of rated folks as well.
Oh, okay.
So, a lot of my supervisors and mentors were rated at that time, but so it's a great mix for me because I had my career field, and then I got to get some insight from other career fields. And tie a lot of what we were doing, which was kind of operational test, back to the operational community, and at the same time interface with acquisitions and all that DoD enterprise to improve these systems. So it was a unique, fantastic opportunity.
Were there any challenges that you remember facing transitioning into that active duty lifestyle?
I wouldn't say they were necessarily challenges, but what I would say is it was unique not treating it like a job, right? It's not a 9 to 5. You don't get to show up at 9 and leave at 5. That's not how it works. And so some of the things are sometimes you're working later, you're up early, or you're doing things that maybe don't fit in what you thought you were going to be doing. Especially as a young lieutenant, you might be a snacko in addition to your job, right? You might be having to help out with ceremonies in addition to your job. And it kind of seems futile at first, right? Why am I doing this stuff? I probably did a lot of this stuff on ROTC, right? Or at the academy. But what they're doing is giving you an opportunity to get in touch with all the people in your unit and really learn some of the ropes like protocol and other things that just help you as an Air Force member.
Okay. So,
but for me, I would say it wasn't difficult. I really enjoyed it, and so if you like what you're doing and you're happy to go to work every day, I think it makes things a lot easier.
So would you say the fact that you were already super invested in like what you were studying kind of eased that into your work life? Can you phrase that another way?
You
talking about your passion with engineering, right? Would you say that directly translated over when you were working these projects with the Air Force?
I would say it did hold a place, but I ultimately wanted to do good things for the Air Force, right? So it was nice that the job I was in could leverage my actual technical capabilities, right? But what I realized quickly was the more important part was developing all the other aspects, right? But also being technically proficient. And it's interesting when you come out of studies, right, where it's like, here's a problem, solve it. And then you have someone that knows the answer in that case, right? In any class you take, you have a professor, someone you can reference. The Air Force is going to hand every officer in every career field, here's a problem. No one knows the answer, but I'd love you to solve it, right? And so sometimes that's a technical problem, sometimes it's not. It's very rewarding to solve either, in my opinion. But, yeah, it's a little bit.
Okay. What are some of those problems you might have encountered that you say you've learned a lot from?
So there have been some challenges, especially when it comes to classification, right? For those who aren't aware, depending on what network you're operating on, you can't pass data between one or the other. And so you end up with these situations where you've solved problems here, but you haven't solved problems there, and you're running into policy guidance, and you're running into people who want to tell you no, but there's definitely an operational connection or a benefit to making certain things happen. And so we had to move a lot of data, some really highly vetted files to different locations. That's just one instance, though, and well, we navigated all the channels, we got it to work, and we were able to get a multi-billion-dollar program kind of say sped up and provide some really good feedback for the pilots for a number of platforms.
Okay. So kind of jumping a little bit further, you're currently here at AFPC, correct?
I am.
As the engineering officer assignments, what does that entail?
One of the members. I do have a team chief,
Yeah.
Major Rachel Gonzalez, so she's been here a year longer than me. It's awesome. AFPC is a unique place. Every career field sends officers to be the assignments officers for their respective career field. And, as kind of approach coming out of EWI, hey, would you want to come down here? And I was like, well, where are you going to send me if not? And they're like, well, we don't know yet, but if you want to come here, you can come here. So I took the bird in the hand. I was excited to try something different and kind of get the insights and the inner workings into a lot of the things that people talk about in the Air Force, right? Promotions, developmental education, all the other various opportunities that we have. Test pilot school, which the 6.2s also get to attend in addition to the rated folks. AAD speed program, so advanced academic degree and special exchange duties program, another really insightful thing. So learning those processes, seeing how we develop officers, at least in our career field and other career fields, has been, and I've only been here 3 months, but has been a great growth curve.
So you've just been able to kind of oversee all of these different programs as they're being built or as they have been built?
I mean, we're interfacing and running them.
Okay.
I mean, we're managing them directly, the people going into them, applying, and then we're assisting with basically outplacing them, making those decisions, and we're looking at people's vectorings. We have a developmental team, as all the career fields do, where a large group of 06s and a couple generals normally come together and they review different year groups and other things. And we get to sit in on those. We get to be their scribes. We get to hear the conversations they have about different members, about their experiences, how their overall records look, what type of things they should do next. And so it's a fantastic opportunity in any career field if you get to do it.
All right, so you're kind of developing part of the education and training is what I'm also hearing.
Yeah, you have inputs into some of those processes. We work with our functional lead is at Secretary of the Air Force Acquisitions, and so we talk with the colonel up there and a group of individuals that manage the entire career field's outlook and the type of things we're looking for. And so do all the other career fields, right? So they do that for their respective career fields.
Okay. What does your team really consist of?
At AFPC?
Yes.
So we have a branch chief who's a lieutenant colonel who's over our section. And then for all of the engineers, which is about 2,500 in the Air Force, and then we have program managers that sit right next to us as well, the 6.3s. They have another about 2,500, just 4 of us.
Okay. Oh, to maintain and work with all that? Okay.
That is it.
But you guys, is that just primarily for like the engineering aspect of it, or do you work with like other folks in AFPC for other trainings?
So we work with other folks, right, depending on the program, AED speed. If we have joint spouses, right, if you marry another member, right, we're going to have to talk to those teams. And then if there's overall guidance or policy coming down, those discussions are being had across the floor. But we do manage specifically for our career field, right? Those 2,500 officers are me and my teammates to basically, do a lot of things for. A lot of things.
Is that kind of intimidating to have that on your shoulders, or how do you view it?
Not at this point. I'd say that they definitely bring people to AFPC who have certain experiences, right? So before I went to EWI, I was fortunate enough to do an executive officer gig for our PEO, and getting to exec at that level was a good baseline to come do a job like this.
What were those kind of responsibilities you handled as an executive officer?
For me, it was almost everything. Anywhere from managing the calendar to, I say OPRs, but making sure that read aheads, if we had a distinguished visitor coming to visit my boss, he needed certain things ready for him, interfacing with protocol, making sure that, all the things are laid flat, who needs to be sitting where in the room, and then really just all the tasks and questions that we get, even from higher headquarters Air Force, right? I did it during the time when we had COVID. Our portfolio was actually in charge of all of the telework capability of the Air Force. And so, as you can imagine, in those first few months, we were pretty busy fielding capabilities and responding to questions from everyone on what do we do, how do we do it.
So how did you guys handle the COVID situation when it hit on your end? How did that affect your work life when you guys overcome that?
So my boss was like, I'm going into the office, which meant I was going into the office. So But most people, they mix of telework. If you worked at a vault, that wasn't always the case, right? So they'd handle shift work. But there was some skepticism at the leadership levels on whether or not work could continue, but it did. And so now there's definitely some societal changes that have happened within different communities on how they manage that. Obviously, if you got to turn wrenches or be somewhere in person, you can't.
Makes it a little bit harder.
You can't do it from home. But
yeah.
What I will say is overall, it's easier to take my laptop home at 8 p.m. and fire up and answer other stuff that in the past may have not been something I could do. I might have just had to stay at work.
What would you say are some of the lessons you've learned from overcoming that challenge?
Really, when you show up, understand you know nothing, even if you have good experience background, right? One of the things my boss said to me is, the best thing you can do when you walk into a new position is understand that you probably know nothing. And you have a background, but just approach every problem, especially when you first sit down, as if you don't know anything. Ask the right questions, talk to the right people, and be on receive mode. So I, as that exec, was just in full receive mode, right? Still trying to execute, but listening to what I'm being told, making sure that I'm, dotting my I's, crossing my T's, validating that everything I'm doing, especially if it's on my boss's behalf, is correct.
Was that ever kind of intimidating, knowing that your work represented, your boss, and you're directly kind of tied with that as the exec?
Absolutely. Yeah. I've always had a delay on my email, but I will tell you that's a very useful tool. That way you don't click send and it disappears real quick, and you have an opportunity to pull it back and review it. So I recommend a delay on your email. I also recommend if you're putting together things or you're at an event, the other thing is once people know you're in a certain position, regardless of whether or not your boss is there or your peers are there, conducting yourself a certain way, so that someone's not going, well, what's this guy or gal doing over here? You're representing not just yourself, your Air Force, your boss, your family. So just not always be on parade, but, adhering to all those Air Force values that they talk about.
Kind of just staying in touch and maintaining that professional appearance.
Yeah, but still, administering enough of a relaxed attitude. You want to be approachable, right? Being stiff or being you're trying to make connections, I would say, like any good business person or any good Air Force officer or airman, you're making connections with your peers, your subordinates, your supervisors, so that you can, like I said, solve problems and be better at your job.
Okay. And kind of speaking on, more of connections, was there any mentors you've had that kind of helped you out, or have you been a mentor for maybe, some other officers and airmen that you've worked with?
I've probably been mentored more than I've mentored, but I've done both. Definitely a handful of people I've mentored, and more I find people coming to me to ask me questions now that I've got more experience and done more things. I've been fortunate to have typically a mentor at every assignment, and then I try and reach out to other people, immediately above me. Sometimes even people, below me, and ask the questions, right? Give me feedback on what I'm doing right, what I'm doing wrong.
How important would you say it is, like developing that mentor-mentee relationship, in your career?
It's extremely important, and the Air Force will push you to do that. You'll hear it a ton that you should be continuously doing those things. And I have yet to find someone who's not interested in being a mentor. Maybe once somebody told me they have too many.
Okay.
Or mentees, right? They have too many mentees.
That's the exception, you'll be like.
Yeah,
nice.
But very rarely, right? They're typically, if you're doing the right things, they're happy to engage with you, talk, and provide their insights.
Well, I'm sure that our cadets are happy to hear that too, because especially with the class coming up that's ready to commission, I know that some of us are a little wary about jumping into active duty for some. It's like, what are we gonna do? How are we gonna manage this?
It's important that when you do meet somebody, that you don't take everything they say just as gospel, if you will, right? Look at everything through your own lens and do your own research and develop your own opinions and thoughts on things, but get as much of that information as you can, right? But because someone told me so is never really that great of an answer.
Oh, okay. And a little bit more on, again, making these connections. How often would you say you rely on your senior NCOs to help guide you in, your decision making?
I'd say it never ends, whether they're retired or not. That type of relationship is really good, especially as a young officer. They talk about it in every ROTC, the Academy, OTS, right? It's a common theme. And it's true, right? You will definitely, and then what's happened is you'll find, you get to the age of 28 and you'll have master sergeants, and you'll be, depending on what your age is, maybe a CGO
Mhm.
coming up on your FGO years, and they'll still have a lot of experiences that you don't have, and they'll have a perspective you don't have. So just like your senior leaders will. So I would
Mhm.
leverage that, ask the questions. You don't have to know everything.
Mhm.
That's the key. You just got to be willing to find out.
Okay. What advice would you give to cadets shipping into they're becoming lieutenants? One of the things they told us, like, you'll immediately outrank these folks, but you want to be able to work with them regardless. Some cadets will go in as a lieutenant and have a big head, because of that. It's like, how would you tackle that down? How would you ground people?
Well, I mean, you could always first point to how long have you been in, right? That's
Mhm.
always like a fun thing. But regardless of that, I kind of like age is just a number, rank is just a thing, right? People at all ranks have great impact. So, do you want to be the person in the room who's the highest ranking, or do you want to be the person in the room who's generating the most impact? Do you want to be looked to as a leader? Because if you do, then you have to conduct yourself like one, right? And so, walking in, like I said, thinking you know everything, or thinking because you outrank someone that for some reason they shouldn't have priority in what's going
Mhm.
on, can be a dangerous place to live. And mainly because you may think that, and what's funny is you may be sitting next to a colonel or somebody else who's looking at you going, that's NCO. I value what he says way more than what you have to say. And so understanding that dynamic and just treating everybody like people,
Mhm.
right? If you've had any experience in the rest of the workforce, understanding that everybody's a valuable person.
Mhm.
Everybody's a valuable member of the team. So put that rank away and focus on getting stuff done and who's the right person to get that done and who do I need to work with.
Okay. Kind of furthering, what would you say are some traits you tell these future lieutenants to look out for to stop seeing, like some bad traits you might have seen in your leadership or experiences you've had?
There is some toxic leadership out there, and you can have peer groups that are focused on things like, you know, getting ahead of you or all those other things. I would just say that, kill them with kindness and disregard. So, if that's the type of person that you notice that someone's becoming or they're doing things, give them a thumbs up. Good for you, and move along with your day and focus on, getting what you need to get done and being your best you, right? Doing the best you can do,
Mm-hmm.
and not worrying about everybody else, right? But you hear that type of stuff on social media all the time, right? Focus on the being best, and that's the easiest way to do it, right? Is avoid all the comparison and all that other jazz. Some other things, where people have used their positions to influence outcomes,
Mm-hmm.
whether it be in the private sector or otherwise. When you see it, just make sure you stay away from it, and then if you have the ability to, course correct on the back end. Bad advice. If someone gives you bad advice, the best thing you can do is just listen, and then go ahead and put that in the trunk of what not to do, or no, we're not going to do that, and just leave it alone, right?
Keep that as this is a sign. I'm gonna avoid kind of going through that. Right?
Yeah. I'm just gonna leave that alone, right? And that's where having more mentors and forming more of your own opinions is crucial.
It gives you more like of a wider perspective on how you're able to approach things.
Yeah, I mean, it's very helpful whenever you're in a situation where you're in bad leadership or you have bad peer group, right? Try and take the 10,000-foot view for just a few minutes and look at the landscape and go, how is this impacting the broader picture?
Mm-hmm.
And if it's a big thing, maybe you address it with someone else, right? Bring it up to someone else. Hey, this is a problem. I just wanted to let you know, sir, ma'am, or maybe you have a subordinate who can help you out. But if it's not a big deal, maybe just let it be.
Okay.
Don't insert yourself where you don't need to be, and get focused on what you do need to do.
One thing you said that I thought was kind of interesting is taking that 1,000-foot view. How would you say you balance between looking and planning long term versus acting in the now?
It's a good question. I'd say literally taking a concerted effort to do it, right? So, I mean, if you have to draw it on a map, some people can just visualize, right? Whatever your source is for developing that viewpoint, go to it consciously. So, and typically I'd say is when your emotions are hitting, or you're having that moment where you're like, damn, try and stop, pause, maybe have a reflective moment, take a cold shower, I don't know, whatever you need to do, and just go, all right, let's think about this. If I was this person, right? The best part, one of the easy things to do is put yourself in someone else's shoes that's at that 10,000-foot view. If I was the wing commander, what would I think about this? Right? If I was the chief of staff of the Air Force, what would I think about this? And kind of go from there. Yeah, you should be able to answer your own question, and if you can't, go ask a mentor.
Okay. And then kind of flipping on, the other end of the question, we talked about some of the bad traits you might see in leadership. What are some of the good ones that you've seen? And I guess the generally things you want these officers to start moving forward.
Practicing what you preach, right? So that'd be a good starting point. I'd say, I had a great first commander, and he mandated unit PT 3 times a week, and he was always there. And he'd come around in the daytime and he'd talk to people and just see how they were doing, and just creating a relationship, a rapport, but backing up his policy with his actions, right? Doing what he said he was going to do, and then whatever he asked us to do, be willing to do the same thing. So that those simple things go a long way when people see it on a consistent basis, right? It's one thing to do it for a weekend or a week. It's another thing to do it for 6 months, a year, 2 years, and keep doing those things, because what it ultimately builds is respect and credibility. One of the things I love people saying is, I will always honor the rank, but you have to earn my respect. And so that may not be everybody's policy, but I think it's a great way to look at it, right? Like, you always show honor to those that you report to, right? But respect is earned, and that's a great way to go back, as we talked about, like, how do you approach it? Well, do you want that person that's underneath you to just honor that you outrank them, or do you want them to develop a trusting, respectful relationship with you, right? So exhibiting those characteristics.
Okay. I think that's a pretty stellar bit of advice that our cadets will be able to work with. We're kind of nearing the end of our time together, but I did have a couple questions I wanted to ask you. Specifically, taking it back to more engineering-specific things. We have some of our cadets that are going to commission are looking at whether, the decision between pursuing a higher education right off of getting their commission or going to their first duty station and then pursuing something later throughout it. If you had the chance, what would you recommend? Going straight off the bat, or taking your assignment and then maybe pursuing it a little bit later?
Either are great. Either are great, but get it done. Okay. If you're going to be in a STEM concentration, we highly value that advanced academic degree. And so I would say immediately, if you can, go do it. But it's just as good to go do it slightly after. What I would say is don't wait too long, because you're never going to get less busy. And you're never going to get further along in your life, right? You may get a family. You may be in a job that's high tempo. So if you're going to make it an assignment, I would say do it in your first 4 to 6 years. But that would be the advice. It's just go, and that's across the board, right? That's not just STEM degrees. But for STEM degrees, we would recommend you pursue a STEM AD. Like I said, recommend.
Okay. And then last off, do you have any last minute advice, something that you feel like you've been told that you really want other cadets to hear, future officers to keep in mind as they're kind of about to commission and jump into that?
Yeah, so I would say the easiest thing is, when you show up somewhere, like I said, don't have any presumptions. Work hard regardless of what other people are doing, and don't treat it like a 9 to 5, right? Always be willing to do what needs to be done, and then treat everybody the same. Treat everybody like you would want to be treated, right? That golden rule, it's so easy to say, and yet sometimes it's very hard to do. But I did have something queued up, but I should have written it down. I did. I had a great one for that, but I might have already said it. So it's really, I guess, for performance-wise, there's never a bad assignment. And people use the term "bloom where you're planted," but what I would say is you can make an impact everywhere you go.
Awesome. Thank you, Captain, for pursuing upon us this information. I'm glad to have you out here. I'm sure our cadets can, enjoy really listening to this. And again, we have the career day later today too.
Okay.
So thanks again for joining us. And did it for 2. Hopefully you guys will catch this out soon. Cadet Mejia again. Cadet Hernandez there in the back. So you'll catch us again in a couple weeks with another podcast. So thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you guys in the next one.